The screen froze for half a second and Elliot Vaughn forgot how to breathe. On the security monitor in his private Midtown office, the playroom camera showed his nanny kneeling on the rug, her hands trembling as she laughed through tears. Across from her stood Mila, barefoot, smiling, talking. Elliot leaned closer, heart hammering. Mila's lips moved again, slow and careful, like each word was being pulled from somewhere deep and painful. He couldn't hear the audio, but he didn't need to. He recognized the shape of her mouth. Real words. His daughter hadn't spoken in 14 months. His fingers slid across the keyboard as he rewound the footage. Again and again. The nanny, Nia Brooks, never touched Mila's face, never prompted her. She only listened, nodding, as if this moment had been waiting patiently for both of them. Elliot staggered back in his chair. Specialists from Johns Hopkins had shaken their heads. Therapists had filled his house and left with invoices and apologies. Mila had remained silent through it all. Yet here she was, speaking to the one person Elliot had barely noticed. The cameras were his idea. After the accident on the Brooklyn Bridge, after the silence moved in and refused to leave, Elliot trusted nothing. Not people. Not hope. Only screens. He watched everyone. He watched everything. And now, through the very system meant to protect his daughter, Elliot saw something that shattered him. Mila reached out, touching Nia's braids, and smiled wider than she had in over a year. Nia whispered something back, her voice lost to the mute feed. Elliot covered his mouth, eyes burning. Whatever was happening in that room wasn't therapy. It was something far more dangerous. It was working. And Elliot knew his life and Mila's future had just split open forever that night. The silence began on a rainy Tuesday, stretched thin across the Brooklyn Bridge. Mila had been humming in the back seat, her shoes kicked off, her voice small but steady. Then metal screamed. Glass burst. The car spun once, twice before everything stopped. Mila never screamed. She just stared. In the hospital, machines beeped and doctors spoke gently, carefully, like words themselves might break. Elliot sat beside her bed for 3 nights, waiting for her to ask for water, for her mother, for anything. Mila only blinked. When they finally went home, the silence followed. It settled into the walls of the townhouse. It sat beside Mila at breakfast. It rode with Elliot in elevators and limousines and boardrooms across Manhattan. No amount of money made it leave. Elliot brought in help. First local therapists, then specialists from Boston, Chicago, Palo Alto. Play therapy, speech drills, bright flashcards and endless patience. Mila participated politely, nodding, pointing, smiling when expected. She never spoke. Months passed. The doctors changed their language. Trauma-related. Then deeply rooted. Finally, one said the word Elliot feared most. Permanent. That was when Elliot installed the cameras. If he couldn't fix the silence, he would monitor it. Measure it. Control it. Every hallway. Every room. Every breath Mila took when she thought no one was watching. By the time Nia Brooks walked into their lives, the house had learned how to whisper. And Elliot had learned how to listen to everything except his daughter. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, waiting, pressing against every moment. Elliot refused to slow down. And deep inside that quiet, something fragile was still breathing, unheard and unseen by everyone else there. Maybe you've known a silence like that. Maybe you've watched someone you love go quiet, and you didn't know how to reach them. Or maybe you've been the one holding things in, waiting for the world to feel safe again. If this part of the story feels familiar to you in any way, share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes, knowing you're not the only one listening in the quiet makes all the difference. By the 4th month, Elliot's townhouse felt less like a home and more like a clinic that happened to have expensive furniture. Every morning brought a new stranger with a tote bag and a gentle voice. A speech pathologist from the Upper West Side. A trauma specialist from Colombia. A child psychologist who smelled like peppermint and spoke in questions. They all tried the same thing in different packaging. They sat on the floor with Mila. They offered puppets. They played feelings games. They praised her for blinking, for nodding, for breathing at the right time. Mila complied like a tiny, polite guest. She would point to pictures. She would write single words on a whiteboard when asked. But her mouth stayed closed as if her voice lived behind a locked door. Elliot watched from the doorway at first. Then from behind the two-way mirror in the therapy room. Then from his phone, from his office, from anywhere he could avoid being present and still feel in control. The experts eventually turned their attention to him. She needs safety, one therapist said carefully. She needs stability, another added. A third, braver one asked, "What does she need from you?" Elliot smiled like he didn't understand the question. He signed checks. He rearranged schedules. He bought silence-canceling toys, sensory swings, weighted blankets shipped overnight from California. He offered Mila the world, gift-wrapped. None of it brought her voice back. One by one, the professionals left. Some with sympathy. Some with frustration. One with tears after Mila calmly handed her a drawing of a girl without a mouth. And when the last specialist finally said, "We may need to accept this," Elliot felt something ugly rise in him. Not grief. Suspicion. If his money couldn't fix this, then something, or someone, had to be hiding the truth. Elliot told himself the cameras were for security. After the crash, reporters had camped outside the townhouse for weeks. His name, Vaughn, pulled attention the way blood pulled sharks. Business rivals, nosy neighbors, strangers with opinions and cameras of their own. It made sense to protect his daughter. That was the story he repeated to everyone, including himself. But the real reason lived deeper. Elliot had watched too many people smile while taking things. A former assistant who leaked private emails. A trusted partner who stole investors. A family friend who offered condolences, then asked for a small favor before the funeral flowers even wilted. So when Mila went quiet, Elliot didn't just feel heartbreak. He felt threatened. Silence to him was a locked room. And locked rooms meant secrets. What if Mila remembered something she couldn't say? What if someone in the car that day had done something they shouldn't have? What if the silence was protecting a truth that would destroy what little was left of their lives? Elliot installed cameras in every hallway. The living room. The kitchen. The therapy room. The playroom. The front steps. He didn't put one in Mila's bedroom, not because he trusted her privacy, but because he couldn't stomach seeing her sleep and still feeling like a stranger. At night, Elliot watched feeds like other people watched movies. He learned everyone's patterns. Footsteps. Tone changes. Pauses that lasted a second too long. And slowly, without noticing, he stopped living inside the house. He lived inside the screens. Until Nia Brooks arrived with quiet eyes and steady hands. And Mila, for the first time in months, turned toward another human being like she recognized something. Not from the past. From a place Elliot could no longer reach. Nia Brooks arrived on a Monday morning with no dramatic entrance and no expectations attached to her. She wore flat shoes, simple jeans, and a sweater too thin for the late October chill. She spoke softly, introduced herself once, and didn't try to impress anyone. That alone made Elliot suspicious. The agency described her as capable and calm. No advanced degrees. No flashy credentials. Just childcare experience and strong references from families who all said the same thing. She listens. Elliot barely looked up when she shook his hand. He was used to people trying harder than Nia did. She didn't comment on the size of the house. She didn't ask questions about his work. She only crouched slightly when she saw Mila, lowering herself to eye level without forcing contact. "Hi," Naya said gently. Mila didn't respond. She rarely did. Naya nodded like that was perfectly fine. Over the next few days, Naya blended into the background. She followed routines. She didn't rush Mila. She didn't hover. She sat on the floor and folded paper. She hummed while cleaning. She let silence exist without trying to fill it. Elliot noticed something strange on the cameras. Mila began staying in the same room as Naya. She didn't engage. She didn't speak. But she didn't retreat either. She played nearby. She watched. Once she even slid a toy closer to Naya without looking up. Other nannies had tried to earn Mila's attention. Naya never asked for it. That was the part Elliot couldn't explain. Naya didn't act like she was waiting for Mila to change. She acted like Mila already made sense. And for the first time since the accident, Elliot felt the unsettling sensation that someone else in his house was seeing something he wasn't. The first rule was written clearly in the binder Elliot kept on the kitchen counter. No deviation from therapy protocol. Every caregiver before Naya followed it religiously. Scheduled speech exercises. Approved phrases. Positive reinforcement charts taped neatly to the wall. The house had run on instructions for months. Naya read the binder once. Then she closed it. On the third afternoon, Elliot noticed the difference on the camera feed. The therapy toys were untouched. No flashcards. No mirrors. Naya and Mila sat on the rug with a pile of mismatched socks between them. Naya spoke quietly, not at Mila but near her. "These go together," she said, pairing two socks slowly. "Sometimes they don't look the same. But they belong." Mila watched. Naya didn't ask Mila to repeat words. She didn't correct her breathing. She didn't praise or prompt. She told a story instead. About a girl who lost her voice during a storm and learned to speak with her hands, her eyes, her patience. Elliot leaned closer to the screen. Naya used gestures. Rhythm. Pauses. Her voice moved like music, rising and falling without pressure. Mila's fingers twitched. Her shoulders relaxed. This wasn't therapy. It was disobedience. Elliot almost intervened. He hovered over the intercom button, ready to remind Naya of the rules, of the experts, of the structure that was supposed to help. But then Mila did something she hadn't done in months. She leaned in. Just slightly. Naya noticed but didn't react. She kept talking, kept folding socks, kept letting silence breathe between words. Elliot's hand fell away from the button. For the first time, breaking the rules didn't look reckless. It looked intentional. And deep down, Elliot felt a fear far worse than failure. What if Naya was right? What if everything he'd paid for had been getting in the way? Over the next week, Naya introduced a rhythm to the house that had nothing to do with schedules. She spoke in stories and pauses, in gestures that lingered just long enough to be felt. She never asked Mila to respond. She spoke as if Mila already was. On the cameras, Elliot watched Naya trace shapes in the air while telling stories about rivers that forgot their names and birds that learned new songs after losing their wings. She tapped the floor twice before speaking, once after. A pattern. A heartbeat. Mila began to mirror it. First with her fingers. Then with her feet. A soft tap against the rug. Pause. Another tap. Naya smiled, but only with her eyes. She brought out no toys designed to teach. No charts. No rewards. Instead, she used everyday things. Wooden spoons, folded towels, sunlight through the window. She spoke slowly, letting words land without expectation. Elliot realized something unsettling. Naya wasn't teaching Mila how to talk. She was teaching her how to feel safe inside sound. One afternoon, Naya hummed a tune so low it barely registered. Mila hummed back. It wasn't a word. It wasn't clear. But it was intentional. Elliot felt his throat tighten. The specialist had chased speech like a finish line. Naya treated it like a side effect. Every night, Elliot rewound the footage. Not to catch mistakes, but to understand the pattern. There was structure in what Naya did, just not the kind he was used to recognizing. This wasn't rebellion. It was communication stripped of pressure. And the more Elliot watched, the more uncomfortable he became with a truth he didn't want to admit. Naya wasn't filling the silence. She was honoring it. And Mila, for the first time since the crash, was responding, not with words but with trust. Elliot should have stopped it. Every instinct that had made him successful told him to intervene, to restore order, to demand adherence to the plan he'd paid for. He drafted emails to the agency in his head. He rehearsed calm but firm conversations. And then he did nothing. Each night, long after the house went quiet, Elliot sat alone in his office watching the feeds. He watched Mila sit closer to Naya each day. He watched her shoulders loosen, her eyes linger. He watched moments that never appeared in reports or progress charts. Naya never looked at the cameras. Not once. That bothered him more than anything else. She acted like she didn't need to perform. Like no one was evaluating her. Like the room belonged only to her and Mila. Once, Elliot watched Mila place her hand over Naya's mouth mid-story. Not forcefully. Curiously. Naya froze, then whispered through Mila's fingers, letting the sound vibrate gently. Mila smiled. Elliot swallowed hard. This wasn't measurable. There was no data. No proof he could hand to a doctor or board member or anyone who might ask why he'd allowed the rules to be broken. But something undeniable was happening. Elliot noticed changes in himself too. He stayed home longer. He canceled meetings. He found excuses to walk past the playroom without entering. For months, Elliot had watched his daughter like a problem to be solved. Now, through a screen, he was seeing her as a person again. And still he said nothing. Because deep down, Elliot was afraid that if he spoke, if he interrupted, the fragile thing unfolding in that room might vanish. And this time he wasn't sure he could survive watching that happen again. The laugh came at 9:42 p.m. Elliot knew the exact time because he'd been staring at the camera feed when it happened, half focused on his tablet, half watching Naya and Mila in the dim glow of the playroom lamp. Naya was telling a story with no clear beginning or end, her voice barely above a whisper. Then Mila laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't long. But it was unmistakable. A soft, breathy sound that cracked the air like glass. Elliot froze. Naya stopped mid-sentence but didn't turn toward Mila. She didn't react the way the therapist had trained everyone to react. No praise. No clapping. No sudden excitement that might scare the moment away. She simply continued the story, her tone steady, her hands moving slowly. Mila laughed again. This time longer. Her shoulders shook. She pressed her face into Naya's arm as if embarrassed by the sound she'd made. Elliot stood up without realizing it. His chest felt tight, unfamiliar, like grief and relief had collided. Mila hadn't laughed since before the accident. Not once. He rewound the footage. Played it again. And again. Each time the sound reached him, it felt unreal, like something borrowed from another life. For the first time, Elliot considered a thought that terrified him. What if Mila's voice hadn't disappeared? What if it had been waiting? That night, Elliot didn't sleep. He watched the clip until dawn, afraid that if he stopped looking, the truth might slip away. In the quiet hours before morning, Elliot realized something he'd been avoiding. Naya hadn't just reached Mila. She'd found the door Elliot had been standing in front of the whole time. Elliot told himself it was responsible parenting. That was the excuse he used when he asked his assistant to run a deeper background check on Naya Brooks. Not the agency version. The real one. He sat in his office as dawn crept across the skyline, the city waking below him. Mila slept upstairs and Naya would arrive soon. Elliot wanted answers before that happened. The report came back thin. No scandals. No arrests. No lawsuits. Just fragments. Foster homes across Louisiana. A brief stretch in Charleston. A few years in New Orleans before she moved north. No college record. No certifications beyond basic childcare training. But one name appeared repeatedly in the notes. Esther Mae Brooks, Naya's grandmother. Esther had been a licensed speech therapist before Hurricane Katrina wiped out her practice, her home, and most of her records. After the storm, she took in children no one else wanted. Kids with trauma. Kids who'd gone quiet. Esther never rebuilt her clinic. Instead, she worked out of living rooms and kitchens, teaching children to find their voices in ways that never made it into textbooks. Elliot leaned back slowly. This wasn't luck. Naya hadn't stumbled into Mila's life. She'd been shaped for it. The final note in the file made Elliot's breath catch. Esther Mae Brooks died 3 years earlier. Cause of death: complications from a stroke. Listed under emergency contact? Naya Brooks. Elliot stared at the screen, unsettled. Naya wasn't improvising. She was remembering. And Elliot realized he hadn't hired a nanny. He'd unknowingly invited a legacy into his home. Naya never spoke about her grandmother unless someone asked directly. And even then, she chose her words carefully, like stepping stones across deep water. Elliot watched her differently after reading the file. On the cameras, Naya told Mila a new story that afternoon, about a house that survived a flood because it learned how to float instead of fight. She spoke of water rising, of voices lost in the noise, of listening for what remained underneath. Mila traced circles on the rug as she listened. Elliot imagined Esther Mae Brooks in a cramped New Orleans living room after Katrina, rain still dripping through broken ceilings, children sitting quietly because the world had been too loud for too long. No clinic, no equipment, just patience, rhythm, and presence. Esther had believed something most professionals dismissed: that trauma didn't erase voices. It buried them. Naya had grown up watching her grandmother sit on floors, holding hands, humming softly while children relearned safety before sound. Esther never forced speech. She let it arrive when it was ready. That legacy lived in Naya's movements, in her pauses, in the way she never reacted too fast. On the screen, Mila suddenly looked up. She pointed at Naya. Naya paused, heart visibly pounding. "Yes?" she asked, barely audible. Mila opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Naya smiled anyway. "That's okay." Elliot felt something twist inside him. Esther Mae Brooks had done this work without recognition, without funding, without headlines. And now, years later, her methods were breathing life into Elliot's daughter. That night, Elliot dreamed of storms and quiet rooms, of voices waiting patiently beneath the noise. And when he woke, he knew one thing with terrifying clarity. If he interfered now, if he disrupted what Naya was continuing, he wouldn't just be stopping progress. He'd be erasing a woman's life work all over again. It happened in the late afternoon, when the sun slanted low and the house felt unguarded. Naya and Mila sat on the floor, sorting buttons into jars. No stories. No humming. Just the soft click of plastic against glass. Mila held up a blue button and studied it for a long moment. Naya waited. "I don't like this one," Mila said quietly. The room stopped breathing. Naya's hands froze mid-motion. Her chest tightened, but she didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply nodded, as if Mila had commented on the weather. "That's okay," Naya said gently. "You don't have to." Mila swallowed. "I miss my mom," she added. Elliot watched the feed from his office and felt his knees weaken. He gripped the desk as tears blurred the screen. 4 words. Simple. Clear. Unmistakable. Naya reached out slowly, giving Mila time to pull away if she wanted. Mila didn't. She leaned into Naya's shoulder, her voice trembling but steady. I thought if I talked it would hurt again. Naya closed her eyes. It did hurt, she said softly. But you're still here. Mila nodded, pressing her face into Naya's sweater. Elliot covered his mouth, shoulders shaking. This wasn't recovery. It was resurrection. For 14 months, Elliot had chased silence like an enemy. Now he understood. Silence had been Mila's shelter. And Naya hadn't torn it down. She'd knocked gently. And Mila had finally answered. Elliot waited until the house was quiet again. Morning light crept through the tall windows, pale and uncertain, as Naya stood in the kitchen rinsing a mug. Mila was upstairs, still asleep, her door cracked open the way she now preferred. Naya, Elliot said. She turned slowly. Not startled. Not defensive. Just present. I saw everything, Elliot continued, his voice steady but thin. The stories. The patterns. The way you ignored the protocol. Naya nodded once. I know. You broke the rules, he said sharper now. You went against every specialist I hired. I did, she replied. No apology. No explanation yet. Elliot stepped closer, the distance between them suddenly heavy. Why? Naya set the mug down carefully. Because Mila didn't need to be fixed. The words hit him harder than he expected. She needed to feel safe, Naya continued. Safe enough to decide for herself when to speak. Elliot exhaled slowly. You could have told me. Naya met his eyes. You weren't listening. The truth of it stung. Elliot looked away toward the staircase. Do you understand what you risked? If this had gone wrong. But it didn't, Naya said softly. Silence settled between them, thick but different now. Not the suffocating kind. The honest kind. Elliot's voice dropped. You changed my daughter's life. Naya shook her head. No. She did. Pause. Then Elliot asked the question he'd been avoiding since the night Mila laughed. How long were you going to keep this from me? Naya didn't hesitate. Until you stopped watching her like a problem. They sat at opposite ends of the dining table, morning stretching between them. Elliot spoke first. Every expert told me speech had to be pulled back. Practiced. Rehearsed. Naya folded her hands. That's one way. And yours. Naya looked toward the window where the city moved without waiting. I never tried to fix her. Elliot frowned. Then what did you do? I listened, Naya said, to what she wasn't saying. She explained how Esther May Brooks had taught her that silence was often a decision, not a defect. That children who had been hurt sometimes guarded their voices the way others guarded their bodies. Every time someone pushed Mila to speak, Naya said, it told her the world still wasn't safe. Elliot swallowed. I let her know she could stay quiet forever, Naya continued, and that I'd still be there. That sentence landed heavily. You didn't need her to talk, Elliot said. No, Naya replied. I needed her to trust. Elliot leaned back, the weight of months pressing in. He thought of the charts, the schedules, the money. All the noise he'd filled the house with. I thought I was helping, he admitted. You were trying, Naya said gently. But trying can be loud. They sat in silence again, this time without fear. Upstairs, a small voice drifted down the hall. Daddy? Elliot stood so fast his chair scraped loudly. Naya smiled, soft and knowing. That sound, the way Mila said it, told Elliot everything. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to who they'd been before. Elliot sat alone in his office long after the house had settled into its new rhythm. The cameras still glowed on the wall, each screen showing a corner of a life he'd been monitoring instead of living. Mila's voice echoed in his head. Daddy. One word, and yet it carried the weight of everything he'd missed. He thought of the meetings he hadn't canceled, the nights he'd chosen spreadsheets over bedtime, the way he trusted professionals more than his own presence. Money had always solved problems for him. It had insulated him from discomfort, from waiting, from uncertainty. But no amount of money could rewind 14 months. Elliot replayed moments in his mind, Mila sitting quietly while therapists talked around her, nodding as if she understood things she wasn't ready to feel. He saw himself in the background, arms crossed, relieved that someone else was handling it. The guilt came quietly, not as panic, as clarity. He had been so afraid of breaking that he'd never allowed himself to bend. Elliot reached for the remote and froze. Turning off the cameras felt like stepping off a cliff. Without them he'd have to trust, to be present, to fail where he couldn't hide behind screens or money. A message from his assistant blinked on his phone. A reminder about an early meeting. Elliot deleted it without responding. For the first time in years he didn't want distance. He wanted proximity. And he knew the cameras, once his shield, were now the last barrier between him and the father Mila needed. The doctors arrived the following afternoon, summoned by Elliot's call. They gathered in the living room, 2 speech specialists, a neurologist, a child psychologist, faces polite, skeptical. Mila sat beside Naya on the rug, her fingers laced through Naya's sleeve. Elliot cleared his throat. I need you to listen. Mila looked up. I don't want you to talk unless you want to, Elliot said carefully. No test. No pressure. The specialists exchanged looks. Naya stayed silent. After a long moment, Mila spoke. I can talk, she said softly. I just didn't before. The room stilled. The neurologist leaned forward. Why not? Mila shrugged, then looked at Naya. It was loud. That was all she said. Elliot felt his chest tighten. This was the risk. Letting Mila lead. Letting the truth arrive without framing it. The specialists took notes, their confidence shaken. After they left, Elliot sat with Naya in the quiet that followed. They'll want to study this, he said. Naya nodded. They always do. They'll want to tell me what to do next. And will you listen? Elliot looked upstairs, where Mila was drawing quietly at the kitchen table, humming under her breath. No, he said finally. Not this time. He stood, walked to the wall, and powered down the camera system. The screens went black. Elliot exhaled. For the first time the house felt watched over, not watched. News has a way of slipping out no matter how tightly it's held. It started with a whispered comment from a therapist. A surprised remark made in a hallway. Within days, Elliot's phone buzzed with curiosity disguised as concern. Doctors wanted updates. Colleagues asked how Mila was really doing. Elliot ignored most of it. Then Mila spoke in front of people who weren't Naya. At a small family gathering in the living room, Elliot's sister leaned down and asked gently, How are you feeling, sweetheart? Mila looked up thoughtful. Better, she said. I can say things now. The room went silent. Elliot watched the reaction ripple outward. Shock, tears, disbelief. Someone laughed. Someone cried openly. Someone reached for a phone before thinking better of it. Mila didn't flinch. She kept talking. About school. About missing her mom. About the dream she'd had the night before. Her words were slow but sure, like she was placing stones across a river she'd finally decided to cross. Elliot felt pride and fear collide. He could already see the headlines forming if the story escaped his control. The billionaire's daughter. The miracle recovery. the unconventional nanny. But as he watched Mila speak freely, he understood something essential. This wasn't a story for the world. It was a moment for a child reclaiming her voice on her own terms. Later that night, Elliot sat with Mila on the couch. "Do you want everyone to know?" he asked. Mila thought for a moment. "Not yet." Elliot nodded. "Okay." And in that simple agreement, Elliot made a quiet promise to protect Mila's voice, not profit from it. Elliot asked Naya to meet him in the study after Mila went to bed. He stood when she entered, unsure where to begin. He wasn't good at gratitude. He was better at contracts. "I want to make you an offer," he said finally. Naya waited. "I want you to stay," Elliot continued. "Not as an employee. As family support. Long-term. With full autonomy." Naya blinked. "I didn't come here for that." "I know," Elliot said. "That's why I'm asking." He explained the resources he could provide: education funding, housing, freedom from agencies and approvals. He spoke carefully, trying not to turn generosity into leverage. Naya listened, then shook her head. "You can't buy trust," she said. Elliot nodded. "I've learned that." She considered him for a long moment. "I'll stay," she said. "But not because of money." "Why then?" "Because Mila still needs someone who listens," Naya replied. "And because you're learning." Elliot smiled faintly. Slowly. Naya smiled back. "That counts." They stood in quiet understanding. Naya hadn't come to change Elliot's world, but she had. And in doing so, she reminded him of something he'd forgotten. The most powerful transformations arrive without asking for permission. The house changed in ways Elliot hadn't predicted. Not louder. Not busier. Softer. Mila spoke when she felt like it and stayed quiet when she didn't. No one rushed her anymore. Conversations happened at her pace, unfolding naturally without correction or applause. Naya remained a steady presence. Not hovering. Not disappearing. She moved through the house like someone who belonged there, folding herself into routines without overtaking them. Elliot learned how to sit. He sat on the floor while Mila drew. He listened to half-finished sentences and didn't rush to complete them. He asked questions and waited for answers instead of filling the silence himself. Sometimes Mila talked about her mother. Sometimes she didn't. Elliot learned not to steer those moments. He let grief breathe. The family dinners grew longer. Slower. They laughed, paused, restarted conversations. Naya joined them often, not as staff but as someone invited. Elliot realized family wasn't built by proximity or blood alone. It was built by patience, by presence, by letting people be who they were without asking them to perform healing on demand. Mila started school again in small steps. She told her teacher when things felt overwhelming. She found her voice not as a spectacle but as a tool. One evening as they cleaned up dinner, Mila looked up and said, "I like our house now." Elliot swallowed hard. So did he. The camera system came down on a quiet Saturday morning. No ceremony. No announcement. Elliot unplugged the monitors one by one, rolling cords carefully, as if he were dismantling something fragile rather than disposing of it. Mila watched from the doorway. "Why are you doing that?" she asked. Elliot paused. "Because I don't need them anymore." Mila nodded, accepting the answer without questioning it. The house felt different almost immediately. Less observed. More lived in. That afternoon, Mila and Naya baked cookies in the kitchen. Flour dusted the counters. Music played softly. Mila talked about school, about a friend who liked dinosaurs, about how loud the cafeteria still felt sometimes. Elliot listened from the table, present. Later, as the sun dipped low, Mila curled beside him on the couch. "Daddy?" she said. "Yes." "I'm not scared to talk anymore." Elliot kissed the top of her head, his voice thick. I know. What he didn't say was how much he'd learned from her silence. How it had forced him to confront his own fears. How Naya had shown him that watching wasn't the same as seeing. That night, as the house settled, Elliot turned off the last remaining screen. Not because he had answers, but because he finally had trust. And in the quiet that followed, Mila's voice carried through the house. Not as a miracle, not as a recovery, but as something far more powerful. A choice. A gift. A beginning. If this story moved you, even a little, please take a second to tap the like button. It helps more people find stories like this. And if you've ever learned something important by slowing down, by listening instead of fixing, share that moment in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. For more quiet, powerful stories about kindness, healing, and the moments that change us, subscribe to Slush Stories and turn on notifications. There are many voices still waiting to be heard, and we're glad you're here to listen.